Fox News alert on the investigation into the deadly train derailment in Washington. The feds confirm now the Amtrak train was barreling down its first ever run on a more direct route at 80 miles an hour, almost triple the 30-mile-an-hour speed limit, when it careened off that highway overpass, spilling cars onto a busy interstate and killing at least 3 people. The NTSB saying while the data recorder in the rear locomotive provided information about the train's speed, it is not yet known why the train was going so fast. And turning now to what could be the president's biggest legislative accomplishment. With the House set to vote on tax reform just hours from now. Good morning to you. I'm John Scott.
Good morning to you and everyone else out there. I'm Melissa Francis. We are live on Capitol Hill and at the White House, where the GOP and President Trump seem very hopeful that the most far-reaching overhaul of the tax code in decades will in fact pass. The sweeping $1.5 trillion tax bill slashes corporate rates and includes lots of other cuts as well, but it's not expected to win any Democratic votes. Meantime, there is new closed-door action on the Russia investigation, with Deputy FBI Director Andrew McCabe testifying before the House Intelligence Committee. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts is live with the story. John.
Sandra, use whatever metaphor you have in mind. They're on the 1-yard line here when the touchdown is just a little bit away. They got the finish line in sight. There's a light at the end of the tunnel, and it's not a train. But the White House thinks that they can get tax reform buttoned up tonight. They do believe, White House sources tell me, that they have the votes to do this. Obviously, Arizona Senator John McCain is not available, so the margin is cut down to 51. But they do believe that they've got Arizona Senator Jeff Flake on board now. Flake had some concerns about wanting to do something more for a DACA fix, not in this piece of legislation, but other pieces of legislation. That relates to the so-called Dreamers who were brought into this country illegally as children by their parents. The Legislative Affairs Director, Mark Short, and the Chief of Staff, John Kelly, went up to see Senator Flake on the Hill. Here's what Senator Flake had to say after that meeting. Listen here.
We're still looking at the bill, still reading the bill, still working on some other issues. Just came from a meeting on DACA, for example, so we're trying to get that moving concurrently with the bill. Obviously, it won't be voted on here now, but January is going to be busy.
So sources say that the White House believes that Flake is looking good, and they have commitments for yes votes from all of the other senators who are sitting on the fence. So let's put up the schedule, the timetable for you so you can follow along how this is going to go. The White House expects that there's going to be a vote in the House this afternoon. It's then handed over to the Senate. They've scheduled 10 hours of debate, but some of that could be cut back. Then if the Senate votes this evening in favor of the bill, there's 48 hours to enroll the bill, and then it gets sent to the president. But then it goes to White House review, which could take a few days. So it's likely that the bill won't be ready for the president to sign until next week. He's got a couple of options. He could have the bill sent down to Mar-a-Lago for signing. It's probably not something he'd want to do by remote control via the auto pen. But most likely, I'm told, is that the president will schedule a big signing ceremony with a lot of people around him for early in January when everybody returns from the Christmas break. Something else going on Capitol Hill today. Andrew McCabe, the deputy director of the FBI, is expected to get a grilling in a closed session of the House Intelligence Committee with the Russia investigation front and center. Accusations of bias swirling around the FBI and the Mueller investigation after emails between Peter Strzok, who is a former counterintelligence investigator at the FBI and one of Mueller's chief investigators, and FBI attorney Lisa Page, that were all disparaging President Trump, went public. Add to that the fact that McCabe's wife also ran as a Democrat for the state Senate in Virginia, receiving almost $700,000 from Governor Terry McAuliffe's Political Action Committee. And then there are the accusations from Trump transition officials that Robert Mueller, the special counsel, and the GSA worked together improperly to give to the special counsel investigation tens of thousands of emails from the presidential transition. An attorney for the transition says that they acted unlawfully in doing all of that. There's a lot rolling around out there. The session with McCabe is closed, but we're sure to hear something about it later on today after the House members get out. Meantime, the president weighing in on a Washington Post report that he was thinking of pulling back the nomination of Neil Gorsuch for the Supreme Court after it broke that the nominee had said in an interview with Connecticut Senator Richard Blumenthal that the president tweeting disparaging things about federal judges was, quote, demoralizing. The president saying, quote, a story in the Washington Post that I was close to rescinding the nomination of Justice Gorsuch prior to confirmation is fake news. I never even wavered, and I'm very proud of him and the job that he's doing as a justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. The unnamed sources don't exist. I am told that the president was frustrated when he heard the news about what Gorsuch said in that private meeting with Connecticut Senator Richard Blumenthal, but that it was later explained to him by the staff and he was okay with it. He later saw a letter that Gorsuch wrote to him, albeit 8 days after it arrived. But at no time, I'm told, did the president ever say to his staff, look, should we pull back the nomination? Sandra?
A lot going on there. Thanks a lot, John. Appreciate it.
Typical day.
A Fox News alert for you on the deadly Amtrak train derailment in Washington state. Federal investigators say the train was traveling more than twice the speed limit when it hit a curve and careened off an overpass, spilling its cars onto the busy interstate below. 3 people are dead.
All of a sudden, it was just a crash, and there it was down. I mean, the train went like this. There was this body lying there. I mean, it was, he hardly had any clothes on. The clothes had just been ripped off him, and he was obviously dead.
Wow.
Claudia Cowan live near the scene in DuPont, Washington, with the latest on the investigation. Claudia?
Well, John, investigators with the National Transportation Safety Board are now combing through the wreckage. They are talking to witnesses and analyzing speed tracking data to try to determine why 12 passenger cars and a locomotive jumped the tracks here. Some of those train cars landing on the busy freeway below. You can see there is still a lot of activity here on scene. And while it will take many months to determine an official cause, no question this Amtrak train was going too fast on its inaugural run between Seattle and Portland. Federal investigators confirmed train 501 was going 80 miles an hour in a 30-mile-per-hour zone, so 50 over the speed limit when it careened off this overpass. And now we're hearing about those first anguished moments from the conductor himself as he radioed for help.
Amtrak 501, emergency, emergency, emergency. We are on the ground. Okay. We are on the bridge 5 at the square.
That'll do. Easy stop, tack bar.
On the freeway. Need EMS ASAP. It looks like they're already starting to show up.
That conductor and 4 other crew members now key witnesses in the investigation.
As far as the crew, today and tomorrow we'll be attempting to interview them, and we hope that we'll be able to get more information about exactly what happened.
3 of the 85 people on the train were killed. Their identities have not been released. 72 others who were injured either on the train or on the freeway below were treated at nearby hospitals. Survivors are giving a lot of credit to first responders who were on site within minutes, as well as bystanders, including some with medical training who rushed in and helped save lives. Meantime, heavy cranes are being used now to lift train cars and other wreckage out of the way on this busy stretch of Interstate 5. Detours have been causing long delays for more than 24 hours now. And so, John, officials are hoping to reopen this freeway as soon as possible, hopefully later today. Back to you.
All right, Claudia Cowan reporting live from DuPont, Washington. What a sad story.
Yeah.
Thank you.
House Republicans hoping to pass tax reform this afternoon. Then it's on to the Senate, where the vote could be much closer. So can it reach the president's desk by Christmas? Meanwhile, a fierce wildfire in Southern California, now 50% contained, as firefighters do all they can to save people's homes.
Unfortunately, when you have winds that severe, and we all saw it yesterday, you just physically cannot save every home.
Right now, California firefighters getting extra help battling one of the largest wildfires in state history. Crews taking advantage of lighter winds for a second day as the massive Thomas fire is now about 50% contained. The fire burning in Ventura and Santa Barbara counties has destroyed more than 1,000 homes and other structures.
We've lived here for many, many years, and we expect it. So it's sad, of course, for the people who lose their homes, and the firefighter who lost his life, definitely.
And the businesses, too,
Sure.
are suffering.
Well, officials think the Thomas Fire will keep spreading to become the largest in state history before full containment. That's expected by January 7th.
This major tax reform legislation will provide much needed relief to middle-class families and small businesses, and will set America on a trajectory towards more opportunity and greater prosperity. Now the time has come to vote.
The House is set to vote on the tax bill this afternoon. Then the bill goes to the Senate for a vote that Mitch McConnell, as you just heard, says will happen tonight. Republicans believe it will pass, even with some votes still up in the air and with Senator McCain absent. Here's House Ways and Means Committee Chairman Kevin Brady highlighting what he says this plan will deliver.
Our representatives have been fighting for tax reform since we all got here. And we just thought America would just keep falling farther and farther behind. We're now going to catch up. Those days are over. And so people are excited about a new economy, a simpler tax code, and bigger paychecks.
Joining me now is James Hohmann. He is national political correspondent for The Washington Post. Thanks for joining us. Speaker Ryan went on later to say that the median family will see their tax bill drop by $2,000. That paycheck distributed over the year, another $2,000 in their bank account. That'll be lower withholding starting in February. What's not to love?
Yeah, Melissa, this is a huge political victory for Republicans. Polls show that the bill isn't popular. They've sort of lost the messaging war. It's pretty remarkable. It's going to pass with no Democratic votes in the House or the Senate, but it's going to pass. And now is when the sales job begins. I've been talking to Republicans all morning. They think that they have a good product to sell, that people have low expectations for what's in it. And once they see their taxes go down this year, which most Americans will, they're going to be happy with it. They're going to see Republicans say economic growth, companies bringing jobs back to the United States. And so this is a big win. It would have been devastating for Republicans if they couldn't get this done, and they're getting it across the finish line.
I mean, it's not sell, don't sell. Can they sell it? What will they say? I mean, it's about Americans opening up their paycheck and it's bigger. I mean, that's all people care about at home. It's not what somebody's saying on television. They open it, oh, I have more money.
That's such an important point. And I think, right now we've been in the what's going to happen. Is this going to lead to, an economic boom or not? What matters is what people feel. Do they and their friends and their family have jobs? How is their investment portfolio doing? And that is ultimately going to be what decides how successful this is or not politically for Republicans, not the deficit, not some of that other stuff. And we'll see what impact it has. Obviously, the stock market has been doing well in part because the markets expect that this is going to happen and go into effect. And now it's going to go through.
Yeah, I mean, the Dow has gone up 5,000 points for the first time in 1 year in anticipation of this, but also because we've seen the rollback in regulation. That's another thing that's priced into the market. So people who are in the market, which is about half of America, whether it's through your pension, 401k, whatever it is, are doing well. The people this might hurt are myself and my neighbors, people in states where you don't get to deduct, your state local income tax. You might see home values drop or the property market slow down a lot in New York, California, New Jersey, Connecticut. Do you think that will matter? Will the bad feeling from those areas outweigh the good?
So the compromise that they made in the conference committee when they were trying to bring the House bill and the Senate bill together was to lower the top income tax rate for the top bracket, in part to help some of those affluent homeowners in places like New York, California, and Connecticut. It is an open question. I think that there could be some backlash. This is the biggest overhaul of our tax code in more than 3 decades, since Ronald Reagan reformed the tax code in 1986. And so when you're dealing with the tax system, there are going to be some unintended consequences. Some things are going to happen that people didn't anticipate. There are going to be some new loopholes in the tax code that people don't foresee right now.
Yeah.
And so that, I think, is sometimes where the rubber hits the road. And certainly some people aren't going to love the bill, and for some people it's going to be a little bit confusing because they're going to have to fill out their taxes in a different way than they have in past years. But the majority of Americans are going to pay less tax next year than they did this year.
So I wonder if if it will have the intended consequence on those areas. I mean, you look at states that are really, really taxing their citizens because, or cities even, you know, like New York City, a lot of big cities, Chicago, San Francisco, where taxes are very high because there's a lot of spending, I mean, is the bottom line. Will they see businesses and people leave, and will they have to change their ways as a result? I mean, if you're an economist and you believe in the free market and that kind of pressure, this should be the punishment to make them change their ways. What do you think?
We'll see. A lot of conservative economists are divided about that. They've been debating. You know, the problem is when you're making a bill, it's like making sausage. And so the last couple months, we've seen a lot of the sausage making process. And when you're trying to pass a big piece of legislation, you don't necessarily do what the economic optimal thing to do is. You do what can get the votes and pass. And so I think if you talk to Paul Ryan, you know, and put him on Truth Serum, he'd say that he would have liked to do this a little bit differently to make it even better. But that this is the best possible bill that they could get through the House.
James Hohmann, thank you.
My pleasure.
British police bust a terror plot. What 4 men arrested this morning might have been planning for Christmas Day. Plus, the U.S. blames North Korea for that massive cyber attack back in May. What it means for tensions with the Kim regime.
North Korea has acted especially badly, largely unchecked for more than a decade. Many of you have reported on that. Its malicious behavior is growing more egregious, and stopping that malicious behavior starts with this step of accountability.
Right now, the U.S. publicly blaming North Korea for the massive cyber attack back in May that crippled hospitals, banks, and other companies around the world. The WannaCry cyber attack targeted computers running Windows, locking up digital documents, databases, and other files, then demanding a ransom for their release. Homeland Security Advisor Tom Bossert says Kim Jong-un's government was, quote, directly responsible for it, and they will be held accountable.
The difficulty in attribution is often to figure out who was operating the keyboard and on whose behalf. And so those are the two biggest challenges. People operating keyboards all over the world on behalf of a North Korean actor.
The U.S. has accused the North of launching other cyber attacks, including the hacking of Sony Pictures Entertainment 3 years ago.
Back to one of our top stories, the deadly train derailment in Washington state with speed almost certainly a factor.
The investigator in charge has obtained a download of the event data recorder on the rear locomotive. Preliminary indications are that the train was traveling at 80 miles per hour in a 30 mile per hour track. The train was a 12-car train, and it had a locomotive both in the front and the back. Amtrak estimates that 80 passengers were on the train, with 3 crew and 2 service personnel in the cafe car.
Joining us now, John Hyatt, railroad investigator with the Bremseth Law Firm. John, we were talking with you 24 hours ago when all we had were some of the horrible pictures of those train cars spilled down onto I-5 from that overpass. What do we know now? Yes, speed was a factor, but is there more to it?
Well, yeah, obviously it looks like the engineer may have come upon some what we call situational awareness, where he may have lost track of where he was at, because that curve, obviously, that 30-mile-an-hour curve, is at a very crucial point, and you're coming out of a 79-mile-an-hour track. So whether it was a judgment factor or whether he lost track of where he was, but either way, it's a real tragedy, and again, a tragedy that could have been prevented with the proper equipment.
I was reading this morning, though, that there are speed limit signs that essentially start 2 miles in advance of that curve, telling the engineer to slow down. Now, for those of us who don't drive trains, is it possible to blink and miss things like that?
No, well, I mean, certainly it is. I mean, one of the instances that when we're coming from a 79-mile-an-hour track to a 30-mile-an-hour curve, why would we only have one advanced speed board, and why would we go from 79 to 30? And I know this happens out there, and we're prepared for it, but it's like coming into a small town from a 70-mile-an-hour speed limit and immediately dropping to 25. They don't do that. They graduate you down with different speed limits, which is possibly a suggestion that it could have made this a little less likely to happen. But again, if he lost track of where he was, or he misjudged, or he was unfamiliar with the territory, any of those things could have happened. And once again, put some positive train control in there for a safety net, and we wouldn't be sitting here having this conversation.
Yeah, you say unfamiliar with the territory. This was the first time that Amtrak was using that particular stretch of track, at least for passenger service. Would the crew have taken that trip before, in rehearsal?
Most certainly. They make what's called qualifying runs over these tracks, and I'm not sure what the exact requirements were for this particular group of engineers or this particular track. But generally, they have at least a couple of trial runs or test runs, which they're graded on and evaluated. And then if they're successful, then they move on to operating by themselves.
Let's hear just a little bit more from the National Transportation Safety Board lead investigator on this case about what the train and maybe the engineer were doing.
The question is, why was the train traveling at 80 miles an hour in a 30-mile-an-hour zone? And the answer is, it's too early to tell. We were glad that we were able to get the data from the event data recorder from the rear locomotive. The front locomotive, as you can imagine, is a bit more difficult to access. And as we pursue that, we'll give you more information about the speed, the exact speed of the train, and the speed of the track, and reasons for that.
I am reminded of that terrible Amtrak event in Philadelphia where so many people were killed, and eventually it was ruled that the locomotive operator, the engineer, simply kind of lost track of where he was, and at least in the early going there was no criminal or other culpability for it.
Right. Again, there are some similarities, and it could have very well been a matter of situational awareness. In that case, of course, there was some other distractions where he had been apparently pelted with some rocks or something. But nonetheless, this is a problem. And you have one person up there in most instances, and they have a ton of responsibility. And it just takes the slightest oversight, and you're into this jackpot. And that's why we really, for 25, 30 years, the National Transportation Safety Board has been begging the railroad industry to implement positive train control. And every time it gets close, our Congress pushes it back. It pushes it back, and it keeps doing that. And realistically, thousands of lives we've lost because we don't have this positive train control. They have money for inward-facing cameras, outward-facing cameras, satellite monitoring of their trains, all these other things, and we can't get this positive train control implemented. Although it was in place on the track, apparently the locomotive was not equipped for positive train control in this instance, according to the president of Amtrak.
Yeah. Ultimately, it's up to Congress to provide that money, right?
It really is, and there's just really no excuse. I hope these guys take a look at this and realize that this is partially their fault, if not mostly their fault. You can't keep giving people extensions. Like I said, 25 years ago, right near this same spot, 5 railroad employees lost their life in a head-on collision. And at that time, both railroads involved promised the families of these people that they were going to implement positive train control. And here we are 25 years later, and it's still not there.
John Hyatt, a railroad safety expert. John, thanks very much. We are also just getting information about one of the victims from the Tacoma Transit ITs. From Tacoma Transit IT, it's heartbreaking to hear, it says, that Pierce Transit employee and rail aficionado Zach Wilhoit did not survive the derailment. He helped our advisory committee with IT issues, and behind the scenes, he was a writer and advocate for better transit for all. He will be missed. One of the victims of that derailment. Melissa.
Top Republicans on Capitol Hill turning focus to the FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe as they look into possible anti-Trump bias within the Bureau. What lawmakers are set to question him behind closed doors today.
If you see any suspicious behaviour or suspicious items, report that to police officers or members of security in order that it can be dealt with. Don't ignore it.
British officials warning residents to remain vigilant after UK counter-terror police arrested 4 men this morning on suspicion of planning what could have been a Christmas terror attack. Meanwhile, German Chancellor Angela Merkel attending a ceremony today marking 1 year after 12 people were killed in a truck attack on a Christmas market. Kitty Logan is live in London. Wow, I can't believe it's been a year. Kitty.
That's right. And today, 4 suspects were arrested in the north of England, 3 in the city of Sheffield and 1 in nearby Chesterfield. And an army bomb disposal unit was also seen at the house of one of those suspects. Police apparently were concerned there could be an explosive device at that property. Residents there were evacuated as a precaution. Now, police are saying the arrests are based on intelligence and they are part of an ongoing investigation. They gave no details about a possible target of this plot, but ISIS has threatened to attack Christmas events. And then we're already seeing extra security at Christmas markets in the UK, such as here in Birmingham, one of the largest markets in the country. There are barriers in place and extra police on duty. Now, police are saying this is to reassure the public, but it does come, of course, as you rightly say, 1 year after that truck attack at a Berlin Christmas market. And today there was a memorial event at that square in Berlin where last year's attack took place. German Chancellor Angela Merkel attended the ceremony along with relatives of those who died. They laid flowers, placed candles beside a new memorial. Now, family members have criticised German authorities for not preventing this attack or offering enough assistance to the victims. And the government today admitted mistakes were made and has promised to do more to help those affected families. Of course, 12 people lost their lives and 70 were wounded when a truck drove into that busy market, and many of the injured are still recovering. Now, here in Britain, there has also been a number of attacks this year, 5 in all. The threat level remains at severe, its second highest level. And police have, of course, over the year also disrupted a number of plots. It looks like they may have disrupted just one more today. Back to you.
Wow, 5 this year. Kitty Logan, thank you.
Well, right now, the number 2 official at the FBI, Andrew McCabe, is testifying in front of the House Intelligence Committee, with members hoping to question the FBI deputy director about allegations of political bias within the Bureau. This comes as the FBI is under scrutiny over anti-Trump text messages sent from an FBI lead investigator on the Clinton email probe, Agent Peter Strzok, to senior FBI lawyer Lisa Page. Here's House Oversight Chairman Trey Gowdy reacting to messages earlier on Fox News.
This was a level of bias that you rarely see, frankly. When Strzok said the vote should be 100 million to 0, what he's saying is he can't think of a single one of his fellow citizens that would vote for Donald Trump. And then you add that, and Lisa Page said, well, you know, maybe you stuck around, maybe you're in this position to save the country. And his response was, I can save the country in a lot of different ways. Unprecedented bias. He's in the middle of major investigations. Thank God he's gone, but I want to know how the hell he got there in the first place.
Let's bring in our political panel. Josh Holmes is a former chief of staff to Senator Mitch McConnell. Jim Kessler is a former legislative and policy director to then Congressman and Senator Chuck Schumer, and senior vice president for policy and a co-founder of Third Way. Gentlemen, good day to both of you.
Hey, John.
Jim, you just heard Trey Gowdy, the congressman, talking about unprecedented bias within the FBI against the man who now essentially heads the Justice Department, the president, as head of the administrative branch. What do you think about those remarks?
The notion that the FBI and the CIA, for that matter, is a hotbed for where liberals are hanging out, like Berkeley liberals, it is laughable. Look, we know without a scintilla of doubt that the Russians interfered with this election. We do not know if there was collusion between Putin and the Trump campaign on this. That's what the FBI is finding out. But let me tell you, when you're guilty as sin, you complain about the process and you complain about bias. Let the process go. Let the FBI do their job.
Well, there's been no evidence of collusion, Josh, at this point.
Well, that's right. And that's why these allegations of political bias are at such a heightened level. I mean, if you look at this investigation itself, here we are more than a year after the president's been elected. We've had multiple investigations stretch on months and months and months, and not a scintilla of evidence to suggest the original premise for all of these allegations, which is that there was some kind of collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. There's nothing, absolutely nothing. We know that there are some lobbyists who had reporting requirement problems. We know that there were some hangers-on the campaign who ultimately had a problem with the FBI and their testimony before them. We have absolutely no evidence that there was anything nefarious with the Trump campaign. And I think the question then is, why is this investigation going on over and over and over again throughout many, many months without any evidence? And that's why this question of political bias is so real.
Let's be clear that some of those hangers-on is the former campaign chairman of the Trump administration and the son of Donald Trump Jr., and the son-in-law in meetings as well. Look, I know Vladimir Putin said that he didn't get involved in the presidential election, and Donald Trump believes him, but frankly, nobody else does. The CIA believes that there was major interference. We don't know beyond a shadow of a doubt if there was collusion, but there certainly is enough evidence. There's evidence that members of the Trump campaign knew about leaks of emails before it happened.
Well,
so
Jim, we know that's not true.
But
we know that's not true. Jim, what you just said, we know it's not true, and that story has been recanted by CNN. I mean, you're confusing two different pieces. Do we think that Russia had attempted to influence our election? Yes, we know that. Do we think that the Trump organization had anything to do with it? No, we have absolutely zero evidence to suggest that. And I think
we don't have proof. Josh, we don't have proof that it's happened, but there's plenty of evidence. The president himself called on Russia to release more emails. We know that the Russians hacked into the DNC and they hacked into Podesta's emails. We do not know for sure if there was collusion, but we certainly know enough that there should be an investigation into this.
Well, when the investigator at the FBI, who has been looking into Hillary Clinton's email situation, writes to an FBI lawyer, I want to believe the path you threw out for consideration in Andy's office, that there's no way Trump gets elected, but I'm afraid we can't take that risk. Jim, that sounds like collusion within the FBI.
So there always is a bias within law enforcement, and the bias is that they don't like the criminals and the crooks. So one of the things that you have is the FBI investigates, and then you have a judicial. They don't sit in judgment. Then you have a judicial system that does so. The idea that the entire FBI is full of a bunch of liberals, I grew up in a very liberal household in a very liberal neighborhood. No one said, please be an FBI agent. That's just not the way liberals think. I can assure you of that.
I think that's probably fair. But here's the point. Here's the point. Well, we're not worried about the full process here. What we're worried about is an investigation that has gone far afield from where it started. We have a year of investigation into whether or not collusion exists between the Trump campaign and the Russian government. We have no evidence to suggest that. The fact that it is persisting without any evidence suggests that there's some kind of other agenda there. If there is some kind of other agenda there, that's what we need to figure out. And if you've got the suggestion that there's political bias, that's a big deal. Well, so that's why this whole thing matters.
Robert Mueller seemed to found that some of his own people seemed to be putting their thumb on the scales and had to fire them or remove them from their roles as a result.
I'm sure there's plenty of people in that Mueller investigation on his team that voted for Donald Trump and voted for Republicans. There are people on both sides here. Let's not get carried away.
All right. Jim Kessler, Josh Holmes, thank you both.
Thank you.
Republicans looking forward to a victory on tax reform. Both the House and the Senate expected to vote on the bill today. What the president is predicting it will do for the U.S. economy.